We'll give up. Yeah, it's working now. All right. So I would love for people to be here. Gloria says, no idea, working on my personal statement. Awesome. All right. We're going to talk about the seed. More specifically, planting of the seed. And you go, what the heck do you mean by planting of the seed? Well, here's what I mean. When I talk about seed, it comes from this book here, the Pre-Med Playbook Guide to the Medical School Personal Statement. This is my third book that I wrote. If we want to count the MCAT book as book number 2, the Personal Statement book came third. And I wish I was smart enough to remember why I actually talked about the seed and planting of the seed and watering of the seed. I have no idea where I got that information from. It just came to me at some point, and I wrote about it, and it just is. So the planting of the seed is your exposure to medicine, to healthcare, that led to you wanting to explore medicine, that led to you having some interest in healthcare and medicine. Now, the question is, what is that for you? And the question is it unique to medicine? And the answer is no, it's not unique to medicine. So today I'm going to go over lots of people in kind of pop culture in the world, not really in the world, in the US. I am obviously US biased. We're going to talk about some people and what was their potential seed. And then we're going to talk about what your seed is. So the first person I'm going to bring up is someone you probably all know, Sanjay Gupta. He was on my podcast. You see the link there, premedyears.com/515. So I had him on the podcast. I was lucky enough to meet him at a conference, was able to talk to him, invited him on the podcast. And in that podcast episode, the question that I normally ask is, why did you become interested in medicine? He talked about his parents both being engineers, and that was the path that he was most likely on. And it wasn't until an unfortunate event, a very common event in people's lives, that he was exposed to healthcare. And it wasn't at that time that he was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a doctor. Like, this is the time. This is the moment, right? It was his grandfather having a stroke that led him at the age of about 13, that led him to going, oh, there's this whole world out there where people are taking care of other people. There's this whole world out there where in a hospital setting, in a clinical setting, when people are sick, when people are injured, when they're ill, they get care from these people called doctors. And that was a turning point for him. Seeing these physicians take care of other people, he was just hooked. And he talked in the podcast episode. He's like, hey, are these people finding me annoying? I don't know what's going on. I'm asking all these questions. He became super, super inquisitive. He became curious. And at that point, it was that interest, that exposure rather, that led to interest, aka the seed. At the end of the day, it was the exposure that led to the interest. So let's talk about non-medical stuff. When you look at medical stuff, I think it's a little bit easier to think about. And obviously, it is something that we kind of resonate with a little bit more. But let's talk about our good friend, my good friend. I haven't had him on the podcast yet. He's too busy for me. My good friend, George Clooney, right? George Clooney, you go, what I was doing to prepare for this talk was really looking through a bunch of people that we mostly know, pop culture, sports, whatever. And I got curious. I said, what led to them becoming interested in acting and singing and coaching and whatever? You'll see the other people that I have here. And at the end of the day, all of them had this exposure that led to an interest that led to them exploring that interest, that led to them eventually pursuing this career. So George Clooney, I was exploring George Clooney's past. His father was an anchorman, a television host. His aunt was an actor, like a cabaret singer actor. His aunt's cousins, or his cousins, his aunt's kids, were also actors. And it was one of his cousins that helped land him his first acting gig. He had exposure, he had interest, he explored that interest, and then he became hooked. He said, "Oh, this is for me." Our journey into medicine is not dissimilar from George Clooney's story, from Sanjay Gupta's story. My story into medicine was not dissimilar from George Clooney's story, from Sanjay Gupta's story. So when I first was exposed to healthcare, and I like telling my story a little bit more, not just because I like telling my story, but because I think it reflects an even potentially more common path. And that is, hey, look, Ryan. Hey, how you doing? Oh, no, it's the wrong way. Hey, hi, Ryan. um, sorry, it's early here. It reflects a path. My path reflects potentially a very common path. I was exposed to healthcare super early on. My dad was a type 1 diabetic, constantly sick, renal failure, dialysis. I hung out in the dialysis centers with him for hours on end on weekends. My parents were divorced, so when my dad would have me on weekends or whatever it was, we were hanging out at the dialysis center. That was our idea of a good time. Kidney transplant, failed transplant, ended up passing when I was 17 years old before I went on this whole journey of going to medical school and becoming interested in becoming a physician. It wasn't that exposure, right? If we go back to a couple slides ago, exposure leads to interest, potentially leads to interest. The exposure of my dad being sick was not the exposure that led to my interest. It wasn't until later on when I injured my shoulder, I hurt my shoulder playing baseball, that exposed me to physical therapy, exposed me to athletic training, where I said, oh, there's the interest, right? It took a passion of athletics, playing sports, being injured, and going, hey, there's this whole world out here where people help athletes. That was my exposure that led to interest. So even if you have what a lot of students will say, what if I have 2 seeds? For the most part, it's just the one seed that led to the initial interest. I had multiple exposures to healthcare, but it wasn't until I hurt my shoulder playing baseball that I was really exposed and led to that interest. So hopefully that makes some sense in terms of multiple exposures, but really one is what leads to that interest. And so what do you do after that, right? That interest potentially, you see there's a lot of potential buildup here, potentially leads to excitement. And that excitement is what leads to that desire to explore. And once we have that desire to explore, now we're on a roll and we can go test this desire. So I have a couple other people here I want to talk about. Al Michaels, if you don't know, for some reason, I watch a lot of sports. So Al Michaels was someone that popped up early when I started thinking about this format of a talk. And Al Michaels, I was interested. I'm like, you have this kind of this gold standard of a sports broadcaster. How did Al Michaels become interested in becoming a broadcaster? So I was like, I wonder if he followed a similar path of having some sort of exposure, obviously being excited about that exposure, building an interest, and then exploring it. Well, guess what? He did. His mom was a game show contestant coordinator. So his mom was around kind of the television industry, helping people with game shows and getting signed up for them or whatever she was doing as a game show contestant coordinator. But then his dad, Jay, was a sports talent agent. Al Michaels grew up around sports. His dad was a talent agent. His dad helped put together the original American Football League TV contract. He was around TV. He was around sports and athletes. And Al Michaels took that early exposure, led to interest, led to excitement, led to exploring that passion. And now Al Michaels has had an amazing career entertaining people as a sports broadcaster. So this next person, some of you may know, I don't know, she's kind of a new up and comer in the music industry. Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift. I was interested. I'm like, I wonder what Taylor's past was like. How did she become interested in singing? And I think part of the problem that students have when they think about their journey to medicine, and I should have led with like why we're talking about this in the first place is your initial interest in medicine, this seed that we're talking about, is really the core of your personal statement. So understanding your personal journey and understanding this path that you've been on and understanding where it came from is one of the most important pieces of homework that we give you when it comes to writing your personal statement. We have to understand it. And it can't just be this super generic, well, I always wanted to be a physician. Like, that's just not true. It's just not true. Al Michaels didn't always want to be a sports broadcaster. He was exposed at an early age to that industry, to sports, to television, and then he took it and ran with it. We talked about Sanjay Gupta. He wanted to be an engineer. He was exposed at 13 years old to healthcare with his grandfather's stroke. George Clooney, exposed at an early age to the acting industry through family. We all have these exposures that we often brush off and go, oh, well, that just happened. Like, that's not why I'm here. And I call BS. It is why you're here. You just aren't thinking about it in that way. And I want you to think about it in that way. So Taylor Swift's journey, I was like, how did Taylor become Taylor, right? Her parents are like in investment banking, whatever. We'll talk about that in 1 second. There's an extra part of this that I think often gets discounted. Taylor Swift's grandmother, her maternal grandmother, Marjorie, apparently she's like singing songs about Marjorie now, was an opera singer. Taylor Swift, at a very young age, her earliest memories of music were of her grandmother singing in church. Taylor Swift had exposure at an early age to singing that obviously led to an interest, that obviously led to going, oh, I can do this too. And obviously the rest is history. But there are reasons for this journey, why Taylor becomes Taylor, why George becomes George, why Al Michaels becomes Al Michaels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this desire to explore mixed with opportunity. And I think this is a big part that unfortunately a lot of people just miss out on because of circumstances in their life, right? And so I mentioned with Taylor's situation, her parents were like in banking, investment banking, some sort of stuff. She had the means to explore a singing career, to not need to make a ton of money because she had the financial support of her parents. And she was able to find her talent, use her talent, grow her talent, and do what she needed to do. And the opportunity for a lot of you potentially is missing, right? You don't have the opportunity to go explore healthcare. You don't have the opportunity, whether it's social capital or something else, to go and shadow because you're busy with school, you're busy supporting family, you're busy with other things. But those things are so important, and you have to make that opportunity happen, because without those, writing a personal statement and helping someone understand why you want to be a physician is going to miss. And we see students year in and year out. Tyra can post a link to our application renovation series on YouTube. It's just applicationrenovation.com. if you go and watch those videos, I have one on there that's a perfect applicant in terms of stats. 528 MCAT score, 4.0 GPA. Perfect because he went to University of Florida as well. So super smart dude, we know. He didn't get into medical school, at least his first time applying. I haven't chatted with him since, because he didn't take the opportunity to explore healthcare. So he had all of these other exposures. He had the exposures of wanting to go into medicine. He had this kind of theoretical idea of exploring medicine. But when it came down to writing his personal statement, he wasn't able to talk about the things that he did to explore healthcare. And so his personal statement fell very flat because it was basically, hey, I like hard things. I think he was I like broken things, I like puzzles essay. And beyond that, there was nothing there. It didn't make sense. And so your journey as you're going through this really needs to make sense for the reader. If the admissions committee member is sitting there going, I don't really know why you want to be a doctor. I know that you're smart. I know that you like science. I know that you like to teach. I know that you like research. I know that you whatever. And if you're not helping them connect the dots to, here's my exposure to healthcare, here's my experience is in healthcare, watering the seed, which isn't really a part of this topic, this conversation, what happens is there's a lack of interest typically from these reviewers, the admissions committees in your story, because they're not convinced that you're convinced that you're in the right spot. A lot of students go into healthcare for the wrong reasons, whether it's parental pressure, whether it's just an assumption of that's what you do when you like science and you want to help people. But there are so many more careers out there for people as they're going through this process that they want to make sure you're doing this for the right reasons. We have our good friend, the crocodile hunter, Steve Irwin. I was interested. I'm like, how does someone become the world famous crocodile hunter? Right? And shocker, guess what? He was exposed at an early age to this whole world because his father was Robert, an Australian naturalist, animal conservationist, a former zookeeper, a herpetologist, known for his conservation and husbandry work with apex predators and reptiles. Sound familiar? Right? His father was basically Steve Irwin without personality, although we don't really know who his father is personality-wise. Maybe he's just as personality-wise perfect, but didn't have the opportunities that Steve had from a television standpoint, right? Steve Irwin, from a young age, his father, around 8 years old, opened up what is now known as the Australia Zoo. That was Steve's life. And guess what Steve's son is doing? Steve's son, also named Robert, like his father, is following in Steve's footsteps. We have exposure, we have interest, we have exploration, and it leads to crikey. That's what it leads to. So I loved this is the first time I've given a talk like this and doing this research on trying to figure out who these people are and why they become who they are. This is all the personal statement is. Who are you? How did you get here? What is your story? If you're a comic book lover, what is your episode 0 or episode 1 book, right? What is that first issue? What is your origin story? That's all it is. And so Bill Belichick, for some reason, was one of the first people I thought of. This grumpy old guy, obviously great coach for the New England Patriots. How did Bill become Bill? How does someone go, I'm really interested in coaching grown men and being around football or being around baseball or whatever it is? Guess what? Bill's dad was a college football assistant coach and scout. He learned the game through his dad. He was exposed, he had interest, and he followed that passion. It's all the same over and over and over. So Jessica White. She's someone I had on the podcast. She's someone I helped get into medical school many, many moons ago. One of my first students I worked with. Jessica White was an actress. She graduated from NYU. She had her bachelor's of fine arts. She was an actress. It wasn't until her dad was diagnosed, unfortunately, with stage 3 colon cancer, where she was exposed to healthcare and became inspired by her father's gastroenterologist to potentially explore healthcare for herself. She was in a position as an actress where she really didn't feel completely fulfilled. And there was an opportunity there for her to explore something else. And now she's she's in residency or finishing her fellowship or finishing a residency at Mayo, doing awesome things. Also recovering from surgery herself. So I hope you feel better, Jessica. I was just texting with her yesterday. premedyears.com/168. So go check that out to hear her story. So the question is, what's your story? Why are you here? Why do you think you want to explore healthcare? I would love to know, as we are kind of wrapping up the slides here and getting into some of the conversation, why did you want to start to explore healthcare? What was your seed? What was your seed? That's the question. Chanel asks, what if my trajectory into medicine was because of a traumatic experience in my childhood? That's your story. Authenticity here is the name of the game. Telling your story is your story. Now, there are potential things to stay away from: graphic stuff, gruesome stuff, that kind of stuff. If you're not going to be able to handle a conversation about it, because whatever's in your personal statement, whatever's in your application is fair game to discuss, just be careful with that. But ultimately, your journey is your journey. Now, there are some asterisks, some caveats to that conversation, but I'll kind of just answer it with that. At the end of the day, authenticity is the goal. But you might go, but Dr. Gray, my story is super common. It's just like Sanjay. It's just like Jessica. Family member got sick and I was exposed to healthcare. That's super boring. I don't want to tell that story. And I'm telling you, that's the story that you have to tell, because that is your authentic journey. And at the end of the day, it's super easy to see an applicant, to read a personal statement, to hear them in an interview and go, there's something not coming off right here. There's something that you're not telling me. There's something that you're kind of conflating or being hyperbolic about, or something where you're saying what you want me to hear and not just telling me your authentic story. So be authentic, tell your story. And at the end of the day, when you're going through this process, you need to tell your specific story, so that as you go through this process, you are able to water that seed. And I know we didn't really talk about watering the seed, but getting exposures to patients, exploring this career in healthcare, understanding what it is like to take care of patients, that leads to this passion, that leads to your why. When I texted Jessica yesterday about getting an updated headshot for this slide, she texted, she's like, oh, I'm in the hospital right now, adding to my why. I didn't know at the time she was talking about actually having surgery herself. I thought she was just working in the hospital, but she still remembered, right, this why. She's like, I'm still adding to my why. And so as you go through your process of getting clinical experience, getting shadowing, doing whatever it is that you're doing on a day-to-day basis, think about it as contributing to your why. You're not checking a box for the medical schools. You're contributing to your why. You're gathering data to support your decision to go to medical school. And you're going to use that data in your personal statement, in your answers to why medicine, why do you want to be a doctor, all of that good stuff. So we're going to water that seed so that one day we can see what your seed grows into. So with that, I would love to answer some questions. There is a separate chat called, if you go to the channels, there's a Ask the Speaker. I can see all of those, and we can answer those. Yuri, I wish we could bring people on stage. That's what I like more, but oh well. I don't know if you can, Tyra. Can you? I don't think so. Oh, you can? Can people raise their hand to speak? Oh, yeah. See, they have their hands raised. Cool. Let's do that. That's more fun. I can't hear you, Tyra. Do I have to do it? Can you do it? Oh, let's see. Oh, they might have to go through a little bit of a setup to get in. So we'll keep answering here. Gloria, does planting the seed also apply to the PS for the PA school? The wonderful thing about this whole kind of philosophy is it works for everything, not just your personal statement to medical school, PA school, dental school, PT school, whatever. It works for life in general, right? We have interests that we explore. How did we get here? So yeah, it does. What if your seed is your parents being doctors? That is your seed. That's your exposure, right? That's your exposure. I wouldn't spend a ton of time on that, right? But you have exposure, just like we talked about Al Michaels. His parents were in television, sports, etc. George Clooney, surrounded by actors. Who else was there? Taylor Swift's grandmother was a singer, an opera singer. So we are exposed at a young age to these people, and we go from there. What's going on with adding people, Tyra? You know? No? I'll try to add. Let's see what happens. All right. Anonymous, 2 exposures contributed to my desire, something that happened to me and something that happened to a friend. Does it make sense to talk about both? No, it's usually just one. It's usually just one. These are fake made up rules that I created. So there's no real like reason that you can't talk about both. But typically in the grand scheme of things, there's usually just one true exposure that led to this happening, that led to this desire to explore. Now, a lot of times what typically happens is, if you remember, I talked about an opportunity is necessary as well. A lot of times what happens is there's one exposure without opportunity. There's a second exposure with opportunity. And that potentially is where this confusion comes from. It's like, which one is it? I'm like, well, yeah, sure, it could be both, but it's really just the one, ultimately the one that you feel is the one that's drawing you the most here. All right, I'm gonna try to add people. They told me it won't let them. Well, that's a bummer. Okay, I guess we can't do it. Boo. All right. Would you be able to show the Y slide one more time? Which slide was that one? The Y slide. That one? Not this one. Which slide? This one? What if my initial exposure led to a general interest in medicine, but there's a second exposure that catalyzed my interest in the PA profession? So that's exactly what happened to me. Is my initial exposure, I didn't really finish that story. My initial exposure was to physical therapy. My initial kind of exploration of healthcare was physical therapy. And then I had a different exposure that led to me wanting to become a physician. So yeah, I think for your PA personal statement, I think that would make complete sense. Of you have this seed this exposure that leads to a desire to explore healthcare. And then the exploration leads to your desire to become a PA. That's the exact thing to do. Matthew, what's your take on an applicant with a background in forensic and emergency medicine considering pursuing military medicine? Go for it. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter what your background is. What matters is your future desires. Do you want to serve in the military? Go for it. That's really the only question. Let's see. Yuri, I'm in the process of writing a personal statement using your book for my post-bac program application. The application specifically asks for why healthcare as opposed to why a physician. It might be a bit obvious, but should I focus on why healthcare and not why physician? If your goal is to be a doctor, I would do that. My guess is that it's a general prompt because the post-bac program is there for pre-PA students, it's there for pre-dental students, etc. So they have a generic prompt of why healthcare. But if your goal is to be a physician, I wouldn't stray away from that message to make it more generic. What if I answered that one? All right. What do you think we should face? What do you think we should face the fear of failure? Oh, how? If I could read, I would know. How do you think we should face the fear of failure? Straight on, my friend, straight on. That fear of failure never goes away. It is always there. We're putting on a conference right now. There are 139 of you here right now. I don't know how many are in the other rooms, but my big fear of failure when we put on a conference is no one's going to show up. And you're here. So I show up every day. You show up every day. You follow your passions. I follow my passions. Magic happens. That's how this works. Sometimes it doesn't. And then you go, oh shoot, what happened? How do I recover? How do I ask the right questions to improve, to adjust, to course correct? A word or a set of words that I haven't really said a lot lately. Something I used to say a ton. We course correct, right? So Batul Jaffer, facing the fear of failure. I didn't get into medical school the first time I applied. I was rejected, straight up rejected. Thanks a lot, right? I interviewed at 2 schools, so I had a little bit of interest in my application. I was rejected at both schools. I'm now in faculty at one of those schools, although I won't be for much longer. But I interviewed at University of Florida. I interviewed at University of Colorado. Rejected at both. I failed my first time applying. So I had 2 options: give up or try again. And so I tried again. I asked questions. Why didn't I get in? What was missing in my application? What could I do better? I improved those things that I found out that my application was lacking in. I improved those. I applied again. Only 1 interview the next time. So something didn't work perfectly, but nothing is perfect. 1 interview, 1 acceptance. It all worked out. What advice would you give to make the why unique? Nowhere in my talk today did I say unique. Nowhere in my talk today did I say unique. Your answer, your why, is not going to be unique. It is going to be common. And that is the answer. It's going to be common. That's why I went through all of these people, right? Jessica White, exposed to doctors because of her parents' healthcare. Bill Belichick, exposed to parents who were coaches. His dad was a coach. Steve Irwin, exposed to a father who was also a conservationist and zookeeper kind of dude. Taylor Swift, exposed to music. Al Michaels, exposed to sports. I guarantee you, if you look at other sports broadcasters, you look at other singers, you look at other people, they also have very common paths. Taylor Swift didn't sit there and go, oh, I can't become a worldwide sensation, phenomenon, whatever, billionaire and go on this tour all around the world. I can't do that because I'm not really unique, because I got into singing because I was exposed to singing at a young age, and that's really not unique, so I shouldn't do it. Uniqueness is not what we're looking for. Authenticity is what we're looking for. The personal statement does not have to be unique. It has to do its job. And its job is to help that reviewer, the person looking at your application, look at it and go, got it. I can see why you want to be a physician. That's all. It doesn't have to be this elaborate letter to yourself or anything else. Some of these crazy things that we've seen, those stand out in a bad way. Can you speak more about how to share that your seed is your parents being doctors, but not spend too much time on it? I think it's super easy. Let me give you an example. I had a student several years ago. I should find out where she's at these days. Several years ago, reading her personal statement. This is a student I worked with for a while. She worked with me through the application cycle. And oh, by the way, like, this is what we do day in and day out. We help students get into medical school through advising. If that's something you're interested in, medicalschoolhq.net/advising. We'll have some promo codes going out later today for MappdCon. People who have come and registered and all that good stuff. But this student, several years ago, had a story of her being injured playing soccer and immediately jumping to, I want to be a doctor to help other people being injured playing soccer. Super authentic, super common. There was just something missing as I was reading it. And I couldn't put my finger on the pulse. I couldn't figure out why I wasn't connecting with this essay. Something was missing. And so we were talking about it. I'm like, I don't know. There's just something missing. I don't fully understand this connection of how you were injured to how you immediately jump to healthcare. There's something going on here that I just don't understand. And I asked a question that I should have asked much earlier, that I now ask much earlier when students are struggling with this why question. I said, what do your parents do? She goes, oh, my dad's a PA, my mom's a doctor. And I was like, that's it. You have been exposed to healthcare your whole life, or whatever part of her life her parents were practicing medicine. She has that exposure, which made it much easier for her to connect the dots in her head. I had an injury playing soccer. She was a collegiate soccer player, Division I soccer player. She had a much easier connection to, I got injured, I want to explore healthcare, that as a reader, I didn't really understand. She, in her head, could make those connections because she's been around healthcare her whole life. And so once she added just one line about having been exposed to healthcare because her parents were in healthcare, however she worded that, it brought it all together. It made complete sense. She didn't need a whole paragraph on it. She didn't need to go on and on about going to bring your daughter to school or to work day or whatever it was. It was the fact that she was exposed to healthcare because her parents were in healthcare. That one sentence made everything else make so much more sense. So that's what you do. It's just a connecting piece to go, oh, by the way, like I've seen a thing or two, right? It's like the, was it Farmers? Is that the farm? I know a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two. Whatever insurance company that is, you guys tell me. Is this either Farmers? I think it's Farmers. Oh man. Gloria, any recommendation to showing versus telling when composing the PS? Yeah, just Google it. Honestly, I think Googling is the easiest thing. I know you're technically not supposed to use ChatGPT and stuff for writing your personal statement. I think it's a very easy thing to take a sentence where you're like, I really just don't know how to show this. Just give it to ChatGPT and be like, I think this is a telling statement. Can you please kind of reframe it for me in a showing statement? I think it's a perfect way to use ChatGPT, see what it does. But Google has an amazing opportunities, not the right word. Google's great. Just search showing versus telling. There are tons of English kind of writing websites out there where it's just comparing telling, showing, telling, showing, telling, showing. Ultimately, if you are starting with I verbs or some sort of pronoun and verb together, that is telling. And so how do you say, I walked into the room? You say walking into the room, right? It's just a simple shift in the language that makes it much more engaging. How to approach the classic wanting to be a doctor from childhood. That's what this whole conversation's been about. So I think go back and rewatch it to try to understand, because that's just not the case. There are exposures, and that hopefully is the message I gave you all, is that there's really no such thing as I've always wanted to be a doctor. There are exposures that you've had that have led to interests. Let me show these slides again, right? So you've had exposures that potentially lead to interest. That interest potentially leads to excitement. That excitement, that desire to explore, leads to the exploration. And then ultimately that exploration leads to passion, which is your why. Not, I've always wanted to be a doctor, therefore I want to be a doctor. There are these steps. And so people are like, oh, I don't have that aha moment. Nowhere in here did I say you have to have an aha moment. Nobody expects that experience. You typically have exposure that often gets conflated with aha moment. You have exposure that leads to interest. Then that interest leads to exploration. That exploration leads to the desire, to the why. Naomi, my exposure to medicine came from from having siblings with sickle cell and taking care of them. That's it. I feel like I had a greater need to become a physician when one of them died. I'm sorry to hear that. But also fell in love with the profession, seeing how detailed and caring they were with my other siblings. How do I pick the actual seed? That is the seed. that is the seed. Telling a little bit of that story. It's not one specific moment. It's seeing. So let me explain a little bit more. You taking care of your siblings isn't your seed, because at that stage in your life, you don't really know that there are other people called doctors or PAs or whatever career you're going into that take care of people. You just know that as a sibling, that's what you're supposed to do. Oh, I'm going to be a professional sibling for my career. It's the exposure to seeing physicians or PAs, again, whoever it is, take care of your siblings. That's the exposure. That's the seed. But it's all of it at the end of the day. Dari. I was once a traditional student at one point where I got my BS in bio and MS in biomed, veered off, started teaching science in underserved areas, now in a master's in nursing accelerated MSN entry program for those with bachelor's outside of nursing. Thought. Yeah. So this is super common. It kind of goes back to where's this one? This slide, the opportunity. So I would want to know what your seed was that led to you wanting to get a BS in bio and an MS in biomed. What was that seed? There was a reason why you studied those. And then at some point, whether it's family obligations, burnout, whatever it is, you decided not to continue to pursue that path. Maybe you thought you had another passion in teaching and you're like, I'll go explore that. And then you have what I've come to term as a pivot point. You have this other exposure that usually is like, oh, shoot. You know that thing that I thought about a long time ago? Yeah, it's still stuck in the back of my head. And I think it's time to go explore that a little bit and listen to that thought. So that's a big part of it, is exploring that. So yeah, for those of you watching on YouTube right now, I'm going to shut off the stream here in a second. Go over to MappdCon.com, register for free, and come check out all of the other amazing sessions. Should the seed be the opening? No, good question. It does not have to be the opening. It can be any order you want. The conclusion typically is the last thing. Kind of has to be. It's kind of in the word. But in terms of seed and watering and all that stuff, any order, as long as the reader understands where they are in your process. Would there be any sort of negative perception if you talk about your own medical issues being your seed? There could be. There could be. I think ultimately you need to be authentic. And if your own personal medical issues are what has drawn you to medicine, I think you need to talk about it. There are ways to talk about it that don't, or that bring up potentially less concern. So I'll leave it at that. And then a lot of it just comes to trying, writing drafts, getting feedback, writing more drafts, getting more feedback, all that good stuff. All right. Let's try to get one more question here. Drew, I'm an older career changer and dated a physician for a while, and that opened my eyes to that as a career. Is that a topic to stay away from, though? I considered it more of a pivot point, not the seed. I don't think so. Again, I think there's opportunity that comes along, whether you call it fate or whatever. I think as long as you have a more clear seed, and then you have this exposure to someone who is a physician, you actually see it in real life for the first time and go, oh, like people do become doctors. I could do that. You actually meet one, and potentially this is the first doctor you've met and have a relationship with, and you go, oh, they aren't anything super special, right? Obviously they're doctors, they're amazing, but they're not superheroes, right? They're not, you don't have to be super smart. You don't have to be the most brilliant people, etc. So go write it. We are at the end of the session. We have sessions all day long today. I'm doing a panel at 2 p.m. Eastern. Go check that out. It's going to be a medical school admissions panel with the Dean of Admissions from University of Vermont, Larner College or School of Medicine. I always forget which one. We have the Director of Admissions from Kaiser Permanente, Director of Admissions from University of Florida, go Gators, and the Director of Admissions from VCOM. So come check out that panel with me and check out all of the other sessions happening today. Thank you for being at MappdCon. You all are awesome. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.